High atop this remote plateau in central Peru, hundreds of elusive shapes can be found in the living rock. Some are recognizable faces or animals. They even have names. The rhino, the dog, the Inca man, the Egyptian ruler, the sea lions, the condors, the griffin.
I like the fact that it's a huge head. That reads very well to me.
For some, these so-called monuments are nothing more than quirks of nature, interpreted by an overactive imagination. While for others, the figures on Markawasi are evidence of a long-lost civilization, a culture which left its mark in stone so they would not be forgotten by history. The mysterious stone monuments of Markawasi, Peru. There is a real mystery here. Could nature alone have produced these sublime images? The mysterious stone figures of Markawasi are unique, even in Peru, a country known for its awe-inspiring monuments. Yet here, at 12,500 feet in the Andes Mountains, is a mystery of a different kind. No statues have ever been found on the neighboring peaks, but on the unusually flat mountaintop called Markawasi, hundreds of images have been identified. Some of the figures are familiar. A dog, a pig, or a frog riding a turtle? Yet many are reminiscent of images found only in remote parts of the world or distant periods of antiquity. A lion from Africa? A pharaoh from Egypt? How can this be? To get to the bottom of this mystery, a team of researchers has gathered the best knowledge and resources available about this site, which was virtually unknown to the English-speaking world a decade ago. We will meet the original discoverer of Markawasi, and in an exclusive interview, hear his theory of who built these enigmatic monuments at a time before history began. We will follow the investigation of a world-renowned geologist and hear his scientific explanation of how the sculptures came to be formed. We will hear from an independent investigator who has passionately researched Markawasi and become one of its greatest champions. We'll watch as a preeminent Peruvian archaeologist explores the Incan burial chambers found on the highest promontory of Markawasi. And we'll meet a high-stakes commodities trader from Chicago who has excavated a hidden cave on the western banks of the plateau to find out if the legend of Saxticuri is true. Computer graphics will aid in the analysis of these ephemeral figures by enhancing without changing the mysterious forms. Perhaps the time has come for Markawasi to reveal its secrets.
It's a large monster, huge head with a snout at the front, a very large beady eye, a very large mouth with probably some big teeth sticking out.
In his professional life, Peter Schneider is an internationally known radio personality. His broadcasts have examined many of Peru's ancient mysteries, including a 20-year investigation of Markawasi.
The Markawasi Plateau is about 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. As you walk around, you see all these figures, small ones, large ones, some 10 feet high, some 20, some 30 feet high, and they're all spread around randomly. So you could come across a sphinx, then you would come across an animal just 10 or 20 feet away, and then you would go around the corner and find another animal, or you'd find a head of a human being. So all the statues, or all the figures, which are well over 200, are all concentrated on the plateau.
Perhaps the most famous of all the statues is called the Monument or Head of Humanity. It stands 85 feet high, and it is claimed that several races of man are visible in this one gigantic statue. On its western side, 3 distinct races have been identified. A Caucasian man faces right. A Semitic man with prominent nose and deep-set eyes faces left. Near the center, a small skull-like face could be Negroid. On the eastern side is an Asian profile, according to some observers.
The head of humanity has 8 different faces depending on where you're standing, in front of it, on the side, behind it, or even overlooking it from the top. The head of humanity is as clear as a bell. You see a huge head looking out towards the right. You see the hair, you see the skin, the nose, the mouth, the eye, the chin, and the neck. So when you look at the head of humanity, you think, wow, what is this huge face doing right up in the mountains of Peru at 4,000 meters? It shouldn't be here, and yet there it is, staring right at you. That is the big mystery, and the most exhilarating feeling, to stand there and look at this huge face built out of stone many, many thousands of years ago.
The mystery continues when one travels around the plateau and discovers recognizable figures which were unknown to Peru till modern times. Many of the statues resemble animals from other continents and mythological figures from other cultures. Viewers have identified an African lion, an Easter Island moai, the Egyptian goddess Thuris, and even a species of tortoise that has been extinct for millions of years.
On the Markawasi Plateau, there are a great number of figures, some of them recognizable as being from other continents, the Asian continent, the African continent. So how was it possible that ancient man, or the ancient civilization that supposedly built these figures, were able to travel around the world? It could only mean, the only possible logical answer is that there was interaction between Egypt and Peru thousands and thousands of years ago. That there was interaction between the ancient African people and the ancient South American people. Even from as far away as Asia, there was connection between the Asians and the Peruvians. Maybe we were really, as Bob Marley said, one world. The burning question over the last 20 years since I've been investigating the Markawasi figures has been whether they are real, in other words, whether they were made by an ancient race who used to live here in Peru, or whether they are just erosion.
To answer this question, Peter put together an expedition to investigate the stone monuments of Markawasi. At the end of the dry season in August, the team set off for 8 days and nights on the plateau. Peru is located on the Pacific coast of South America, surrounded by Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, Bolivia, and Chile. Within its borders are coastal regions, deserts, jungles, and high mountains. 50 miles northeast of the capital city Lima, on the westernmost edge of the Peruvian Andes, sits the Markawasi Plateau. At 12,500 feet in elevation, travel to Markawasi requires many different forms of transportation. The first leg of the journey, from Lima to Chosica, was a fairly luxurious ride through the countryside. At the bustling town of Chosica, the comfortable tour bus had to be exchanged for a more rugged vehicle better suited to negotiate the narrow roads and switchbacks that wind their way up the mighty Andes Mountains. The final destination, before reaching the summit of Markawasi, was the small town of San Pedro de Casta.
The little village of San Pedro de Casta, which has 1,300 inhabitants, is at 3,200 meters above sea level, and the road ends there. So if you go there, you will get off the bus at that point. And from there onwards, it's either on foot, on donkey, or on a horse. In San Pedro de Casta, it's your last chance to get a shower, to get a loaf of bread from the local bakery, and that's your last stop before the adventure begins.
After an arduous 5-hour drive from Lima, the weary travelers were greeted with a joyous festival celebrating their arrival and the opening of a new bakery. Peter was the guest of honor, as he was instrumental in the founding of the bakery. The team got a good night's rest and began preparations to ascend the remaining 3,000 feet. Virtually everything they would need had to be brought up by mules or horses. The villagers know well that the 3-hour climb to the plateau must be concluded well before sunset, when the temperatures plunge to below freezing. While the guides headed up the mountain with the team's equipment and provisions, Peter began watching the skies for the arrival of the helicopter and the last 2 members of the expedition.
We are standing here in the football field of the village of San Pedro de Casta, up in the Andes Mountains. We're waiting for a well-known American geologist, Dr. Schoch, and his assistant Logan to arrive by helicopter in a few minutes. And I've invited Dr. Schoch to come up to Markawasi to have a look at the stone figures and give us his expert opinion.
Peter greeted Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, and his assistant Logan. Dr. Robert Schoch has a PhD in geology from Yale University and is a professor of geology at Boston University. He is perhaps best known for his research on the weathering of the Great Sphinx of Egypt and his conclusion that the Sphinx could be thousands of years older than history tells us, based on an analysis of the erosion.
I invited Dr. Robert Schoch to visit Markawasi because we need somebody who really has an objective view. And Dr. Robert Schoch has a worldwide reputation. He's a geologist and is an expert in ancient stones. So Dr. Schoch is absolutely the perfect person to tell us whether Markawasi is real or if it's just nature.
So I came with an open mind, honestly not convinced that these sculptures, and I use that term loosely, were actually human-carved artifacts versus just natural erosional features. But I wanted to see what things might look like on the ground.
In order to better understand the Markawasi mystery, we must meet the man credited with its discovery, a Peruvian archaeologist named Daniel Ruzo. This rare interview was filmed at his home in Cuernavaca, Mexico, when Dr. Ruzo was 91 years old. His wife Carola translates what was to be his last interview.
This is the first picture that he saw of Markawasi in his friend's house. Finally, his friend gave the picture to him and he decided to organize an expedition.
While Ruzo is often credited with the discovery of Markawasi, its mysterious origins go back half a century before. It all started with the vision of Peruvian scholar Pedro Astete. In 1905, Astete dreamed of a forgotten ancient culture called the Masma. According to Astete, the Masma were wiped out by the Great Flood some 6,500 years ago, but not before they left their traces on the planet. His dream became reality when his scholarly research confirmed the existence of the Mazma. They were mentioned in the Bible and known to the Romans as a race whose history extended beyond time immemorial. Russo met Estete in 1924, and using symbology and ancient texts, they deduced that the Mazma culture left prehistoric stone sculptures around the world to mark what they believed were occult treasures located in subterranean caves. For the rest of his life, Russo searched the world for evidence of the Mazma culture and the occult treasure that they left behind. When Russo first saw the photo of the so-called Inca head, he recognized immediately that this could be evidence of the elusive Mazma culture. In 1952, Russo mounted an expedition to see for himself and made the strenuous trek up to the Markawasi Plateau. When he first saw the Inca head, he could not believe the sheer magnitude and artistry of the figure. But upon examining it from all angles, he discovered several different faces, which represented the four races of humanity. He called this statue the Monument of Humanity. Along with a local campesino named Don Manuel, Russo began to investigate the rest of the plateau. To his amazement, they found hundreds of representations of animals from remote parts of the planet, mythological figures from various cultures, and bizarre effigies that defied explanation. Over the next 8 years, Russo continued his field studies in Markawasi while poring over ancient texts and occult writings. He concluded that Markawasi was where the Mazma culture survived a cataclysmic flood by living in subterranean tunnels. Unfortunately, he was never able to excavate the tunnels he believed existed under the Markawasi Plateau. Today, Peter Schneider continues to explore Markawasi. As the leader of the expedition, his immediate concern was to get everybody up to the top of the plateau before the sunset and the temperatures plunged to below freezing. After 20 years of searching, Peter is hoping that this team will finally put to rest some of Markawasi's greatest mysteries.
Coming up to Markawasi, we approached it by horse in the afternoon, late afternoon, so we came up the northern end and approached initially what has sometimes been called the Inca head, other times has been called things like the Monument to Humanity, a huge, I'll use the term loosely, stone sculpture. And that was the first of these, using the term loosely, sculptures or artifacts that I saw. Honestly, I didn't know what to think of it. It was late. We were all tired, but it looked pretty interesting. Take a look at it here. There's supposed to be a face on the left, a face on the right. There's like a little face there, another face there.
They're supposed to represent a lot of different cultures.
So yeah, let's go here and look and continue. Oh yeah, here you see it even better actually, don't you? Right in here. Looks very nice. Look at that. You can see the face on the right side. You can see, oh, look at the huge nose.
Well, especially on the face to the way right, it does seem like there's a natural fault line accentuated along the cheekbone, and someone may have just gone in there and chipped out, like you were talking about earlier, with tools to accentuate a nose shape.
I see what you mean, working along that natural weak zone and just taking it right off. And if someone saw that shape and said this is starting to look like a face, but they wanted to really make it look more like a face, that would be the natural thing to do.
What are the chances that a rock could weather in that sort of pattern along those, right, with a nose and a mouth and what seems to be a chin?
Certainly you don't see something like that on a regular basis. On the other hand, we do see things like in America, the things that they will call the old man in the mountain, that everyone agrees is a natural feature, but looks a lot like a human face. If this is absolutely natural without any artificiality, without any retouching to it, it's still incredibly unusual. I mean, there seems to be a face there, in my opinion, whether it's totally natural or if it's a combination of natural with some artificial retouching.
Now, why do you see this coloration difference right around the area that looks carved, or
See, I think
that
that's
could be carved?
I think that's very important in this case, because that different coloration to me looks like it means that rock is fresher. It's been exposed more recently. I mean, that is still a very old surface. So even if this was occurring by some kind of human intervention, it's hard for me to estimate without more data, without more comparative analysis here. But I would think we're talking at least hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. So I think we're talking old, either way.
So, Dr. Shaw, have you had the chance to
Well,
look at the statue here?
it's been nice. I've spent the morning and early afternoon really getting a feel for the northern area of the plateau
Good.
here. I mean, I look at this, and you know, it doesn't take that much imagination to see a face, a profile of a face on the right side, another profile of a face on the left side, I think I see.
Yes, that's correct, yeah. And then, as we walk around, we're going to find more faces.
Yeah.
Over the next few days, Peter shows Dr. Schock and the team some of the other
Look at
images
this,
that
guys.
Markawasi has to offer.
Look at this here. The prophet. We have in front of us the most majestic of all the figures here in Markawasi. We have a human head, a male figure, and very clearly you see his eyes and the pupil of his eyes. His eyes are open. You see a long Roman nose. As you look down, you see his beard. This is an old man. You can see the wrinkles on his face. Then you can see the hairline. You can see his whole head. And he's wearing some kind of a headband around the top of his head, which is very clear. And he has a ponytail. You can actually see the hair tied up in a ponytail on the back of his head. He's looking out over the valley.
While Peter is very familiar with the faces and figures, having studied them for 20 years, Schock remains committed to an objective examination of the geological features of Markawasi. If these images are representative of diverse world cultures, it would seem to support Rousseau's theory of an ancient civilization that was capable of world travel. What is at stake? Peter thinks it may be time to rewrite the history books. But is he right? And will Schock be able to supply the answer? One of the most intriguing aspects of Markawasi is the possibility that some of the monuments resemble icons depicted by cultures from around the world. Dr. Rousseau, who studied ancient texts and symbology, believed that whoever made the monuments in Markawasi had a direct knowledge of the ancient civilization of Egypt. During an early expedition, Rousseau discovered, on the southern end of the plateau, what he felt was proof of this theory. Carved on a 200-foot outcrop of granite, he identified two Egyptian deities: Thoris, the goddess of birth, personified as a hippopotamus, and Sobek, the god of death and rebirth, personified as a crocodile. Amazingly, these two figures are often seen concurrently, with Sobek behind Thoris, suggesting birth is followed by death and rebirth, as depicted in these New Kingdom hieroglyphics.
Well, you could say it's the Egyptian goddess Thoris, god of fertility. But we see some ears sticking out at the back, at the top. Then we see the face with a little kind of an eye and a long snout and a large, huge mouth, really.
Right, exactly.
Then there's a whole body which is kind of pregnant, right? Because she must be pregnant.
The pregnant hippo often represent the goddess of fertility.
Behind the hippo figure, we see a crocodile figure. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do. Right behind there.
And Rousseau associates this crocodile figure with Sobek.
Oh, the god, the Egyptian god Sobek, that has to do with death and the deceased and actually rebirth again. In fact, that would make a nice connection, if that's correct, if Rousseau's correct, between, and you see that often in Egypt, where the fertility goddess, birth is followed by the goddess essentially of death. So death and birth, rebirth, resurrection, death again, essentially the life cycle. I mean, it's a very common motif that you see in ancient Egypt on many of the temples, like the Temple of Dendera and other great temples in Egypt. But these are African animals. We are in Peru. These are Egyptian motifs, ancient Egyptian motifs. We are in Peru, ocean away. What's going on here?
On a desolate island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, an ancient culture left behind gigantic statues that have intrigued researchers for hundreds of years. The Moai of Easter Island exist nowhere else on the planet. Or do they? Dr. Russo discovered what he felt was an ancient replica of an Easter Island Moai on the Markawasi Plateau. He recognized many similarities, including the characteristic top knot of stone perched on top of the head. Was there an ancient connection between Easter Island, Peru, and Egypt? Russo, like his contemporary, the Norwegian Thor Heyerdahl, felt there was. In Heyerdahl's famous Kon-Tiki expedition, he demonstrated a possible connection between Peru and Easter Island by sailing across the Pacific Ocean in a boat made of balsa. In his later Ra-2 expedition, Heyerdahl sailed across the Atlantic Ocean from North Africa to an island off the coast of South America. This boat was made of a papyrus reed called totora. Today, the totora reed is found only in 3 places in the world: Easter Island, Egypt, and Lake Titicaca in Peru. In one of those rare moments of discovery, Peter captured on film what he feels is a likeness of an Egyptian woman's delicate features. Another image from Markawasi that Dr. Russo felt strengthens the Egyptian connection is what he called the pharaoh.
So here we have a very, very curious figure. To me, and maybe to you too, it looks like an Egyptian pharaoh. If you look on the left-hand side, you see the menes, which is like a big headgear which covered the ears of all the Egyptian pharaohs. If you look further up to the top of his head, you'll see like a little snake sticking out, which looks like, used to call that the Ureus. Then you go down the face, you see his eyes, you see his nose, you see his frowning mouth, and below that, a little goatee beard, again typical of the pharaohs. So I asked myself, what is an Egyptian pharaoh doing here? And was there contact thousands of years ago between the ancient Peruvians and the ancient Egyptians?
Dr. Russo theorized that the Masma, a technologically evolved culture, existed before a great flood devastated the Earth 6,500 years ago. The current model of mankind's development says that no advanced civilization existed at this time. But controversial new evidence in Egypt suggests that civilization could be much older. Dr. Robert Schoch is perhaps best known for his redating of the Great Sphinx of Egypt. According to Egyptologists, the Sphinx is 4,500 years old. Dr. Schoch contends that the body of the Great Sphinx has been massively eroded by rainwater. However, there has been no significant rainfall in the desert for over 6,000 years. Therefore, Schoch concludes the Great Sphinx is at least 6,000 years old, over 1,500 years older than experts currently believe. What advanced culture, then, was responsible for building the Sphinx? Could it have been the Masma civilization theorized by Russo?
Well, we've seen several African animals here on the plateau of Markawasi, but now I have something very special for you.
Okay.
The African queen.
The African queen?
The African queen. Right up on the mountain in front of us, facing the left, you see a fabulous picture of a lady, the African lady, with her forehead, her little small nose, her mouth, her chin, and the whole figure is sitting on top of a large rock, which would be her body.
I see it. And it looks like her hair is pulled back.
Yes, it looks like she has like a large headdress, which gives her the queen-like appearance.
Right, but you know what her profile looks like to me? The profile of the Great Sphinx in Egypt.
Wow.
Very much so. It reminds me of that. And our forensic expert identified it as an African. When I saw that face, immediately reminded me of my old friend, the profile of the Great Sphinx. Very, very similar. Now, is there a real connection here? Could there be some kind of connection between Peru and ancient Egypt? I would say it's very weak evidence in and of itself, in isolation, but put together with lots of other evidence we have for intercontinental connections in ancient times. This seems to be just one more piece of the puzzle.
It's a fantastic figure.
That is fantastic.
In two strategic locations on the Markawasi Plateau are ancient ruins, which have been identified as Incan. Were the Incas responsible for the statues on Markawasi? To answer this question, Peter invited Dr. Marino Sanchez, the head of archaeology at the famous Inca stronghold of Machu Picchu. Dr. Sanchez wrote his doctoral thesis on Markawasi's irrigation system and the people who developed it.
We are in the city of gods, where the ancient Markawasi people built these structures. They made them in these high places, and their dead were buried in these buildings called chulpas. All of these chulpas have been constructed in a very simple manner. They have stone roofs, but if we use a compass, we see the sun is rising from there. It will enter the windows and energize the dead. For us they are dead, but for the ancients they were living beings, the spirits who watched over the people of the city.
According to Dr. Sanchez, these people were not the Incas, but predecessors of the Incas called Walalo Carwincho, who subdivided into the Markawasi culture around 800 AD. They were a group of astronomers and priests who controlled the flow of precious water to the farmers below.
The important thing to know is how the environment with these natural figures impregnated itself in the consciousness of the people. These people held them as sacred things, spirits, gods of the sacred cosmos.
While Dr. Sanchez maintains that the images of Markawasi were probably in existence many years before the Inca, the origin of these figures remains a mystery. Dr. Ruzo and Pedro Estete theorized that the stone sculptures of Markawasi were markers left behind by the lost Mazma culture. The Markawasi Plateau, they proposed, is the location of subterranean chambers which provided refuge from a cataclysmic flood and a repository for records of their advanced civilization. Today, the search for these chambers and the records they could hold continues due to one man's obsession. Alan Matthew is an international commodities trader. Each day he trades millions of bushels of grain and soybeans in the high-stakes world of the Chicago Commodities Exchange. But for the last 18 years, his idea of relaxation has been climbing to the top of the Markawasi Plateau to excavate a site known to locals as the Infernillo, or in English, the Inferno. This unusual crevice near an escarpment on the plateau's southern edge is rumored to be a possible entrance to the hidden chambers of the Mazma.
After about 18 years of coming here and hearing the mythology, I decided that I'd go for it and start digging and see if there was, anything down there.
Yeah.
And as you can see, we've taken out literally tons of dirt, massive rocks. We're down to about 39 feet from the surface now.
Okay. I mean, what I see here geologically is you've got some kind of weak zone or fault, some kind of natural opening in this igneous rock. And it seems like this would have filled in with dirt, filled in with soil and debris. And what you've done is you've taken that out, taken out a lot of loose rocks and been going down. And when I looked down in there, as we were down in there, I mean, you could go down further.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think.
a lot
You can
further.
go down a lot further. Now, what you expect to find, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what I expected to find was really what Don Manuel expected to find. I mean, I started this based on his, undying belief that there's a cave structure there.
Now you said that he went down this very spot before.
Right.
And you also told me, I believe, when we were down there, that in some cases you would hit pockets where fresh air seemed to come out?
We'd hit a pocket about, maybe this wide, and the air would be just blowing out from it. And then, of course, because they believe in the mountain spirits, they'd immediately throw in some coca leaves and smoke some cigarettes and throw them
as a sacrifice.
As a sacrifice, a ritual, and then they'd start to dig again.
Right, but the fact that you're getting fresh air coming out suggests that maybe there is something, some kind of system or some kind of pockets.
Well, it's so funny that all these years, I mean, they had this myth that if you jumped over it, something bad would happen to you or something.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Don Manuel tells the legend of the Infernillo and accounts of hapless travelers who got too close.
Very well. There is a legend about the Infernillo. They are two rocks, not too far apart. If a person tries to jump across from one side to the other, the rocks would open and the person would fall inside into the abyss. After a few days, the person would come out in the valley below. The person would never be quite the same afterward. He would be half crazy. This is the Infernillo.
I always jumped over it for fun. I always worried.
Just to see what would happen?
Yeah, and nothing happened.
That's good. I'm glad.
Since 1952, when Markawasi was first visited by Daniel Russo, thousands of travelers have come to San Pedro and made the trek up to the plateau.
Sure, working here with the organization, I've gotten the opportunity to go visit several of the villages in the area and even visit some of the ruins, because most of the villages have neighboring Inca ruins, and I haven't seen anything like Markawasi anywhere in Peru for that matter. With so many different animals and faces and seemingly sculpted rocks appearing up there, it just seems like there's too many of them to sort of rule out the possibility that they were sculpted at one point in time.
I'm not sure if some civilization create these figures on the plateau in Markawasi, but I'm sure this place is sacred for these people. And the first time that I came here, for me was the same, sacred.
In addition to the claims of lost cultures and gigantic stone monuments, there are purported healing energies said to emanate from the plateau itself. High atop a granite outcrop overlooking an ancient lagoon, there is a cross etched in stone. It has also been claimed that the center of this cross marks a vortex of telluric energies, which can be detected with dowsing rods. Dowsing rods are simple tools that are said to amplify various earth energies otherwise too subtle to detect. The team tested this theory using simple dowsing rods made with coat hangers. The results were compelling.
I'm a little past.
Your spine's right on it.
Yeah, my spine's right on it.
People who have lain on the cross, with their head at the north and their feet at the south, have reported experiences ranging from mystical visions to miraculous healings.
Oh my God. Oh, wow.
Where'd you go?
Through some dimensional thing, whatever. But I didn't know where I was here when I woke up. I didn't have a clue.
It's called the Healing Cross. I can't really comment as a geologist whether it has any healing powers or not, but what I do find interesting is that when I pull out my compass and compare the coordinates of the compass to the cross, this cross is very precisely aligned north, south, east, west. So someone was really paying attention to what they were doing when they were scraping this cross, I would guess several hundred years ago.
Peter explains what happened to his friend Carlos Seclen after a debilitating car accident left him unable to walk.
He couldn't move, he was in traction, and the doctors couldn't do anything for him at all. So in the end, he asked his friends to carry him up here on a stretcher, and they literally carried him all the way here, and they left him on this cross here. And he was up here for about 3 months. For 3 months he didn't come down. But when he came down walking.
Perhaps one of the most bizarre images Russo identified on Markawasi is the one he placed on the cover of his book, a pair of figures he calls the astronauts.
Well, we're going to have to use our imagination a little bit here, Dr. Shaw.
Okay.
When Russo arrived at this very spot where we're sitting right at the moment, he saw two extraordinary beings. They could be called astronauts.
Astronauts.
Astronauts from the future.
Wow.
And if you look carefully, you'll see two beings lying against the large rock on the left-hand side. The further one away, you see a very large helmet, or a man wearing a helmet, shall I say.
Right.
The large body, one single piece of rock, a large body wearing a astronaut suit, and then his two legs below there, in a different shade. Coming forward a little bit on the left-hand side, you see another astronaut facing the same direction. They're both facing towards us here.
Right.
He has a more complex structure. He has his arms, he has a very large helmet, he has a head on top, and he's looking towards us. And there they are, the two astronauts.
Yeah, it's like the old is looking that way, the new is looking this way in this case.
Yes, very good.
They're facing each other.
That's right.
I mean, that hippo
from ancient
seems to
times.
be from ancient Egyptian times, or at least it looks like that type of motif. Astronauts are completely incompatible with that. I mean, we're talking thousands of years difference. I mean, I don't understand this at all.
The ancient and the modern.
Ancient and the modern. But if these are ancient sculptures, how can we have the ancient and the modern? If they're ancient sculptures, to think that we've got things from Egypt when we're sitting in Peru at close to 13,000 feet, that's incredible enough. But to now tell me that we're seeing astronauts here, that's
beyond
like
belief.
Beyond belief.
Beyond belief.
Yeah, where are we sitting here? I mean, it seems like this is a very comfortable place to just sit.
It is, absolutely. No, definitely the ancient builders of this place took into consideration that people wanted to look at their works of art, and they put these little seats all over the place so we can sit comfortably.
So we can sit comfortably, enjoy the view. I like that.
Well, all the figures here on the Markawasi Plateau are either facing out over the valley, or they're facing directly towards you, or to the left or to the right. But right here where we are, we have a most extraordinary figure facing up towards the sky.
Oh, it's looking straight up.
Looking straight up, yeah. We see a huge head. In fact, we see the whole body, starting with the head on the left-hand side, with an open eye, a prominent nose, closed mouth, with the lips closed.
I can see that.
And we have the chin there coming up after the mouth.
Right.
And then we have kind of like a small neck, very short neck, and then the whole body which stretches out to the right-hand side to where his feet would be. And he could have what we call a headdress. It looks like, some people say, look at this figure, he's wearing some kind of a headdress.
Oh, on the very left there.
Yeah, well like where his head is.
Right.
There's something on his head.
Right, I see what you mean.
Not necessarily hair.
But looking straight up.
Now, some people say this figure is similar to the figure face of Mars.
Oh, the face of Mars,
from
Cydonia, region of Mars.
That's right, because that face is also looking upwards
Straight
towards the sky. And this is the only figure, or one of the very few figures here on Markawasi, which looks straight up towards the sky.
Wow.
The ability to see figures and faces in nature has fascinated artists and mystics from the earliest times. Familiar images, like the presidential faces, which adorn Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, are clearly man-made. But the source of images, like the Old Man of the Mountain in New Hampshire, are less obvious. Figures like these have been detected in cliffs and promontories all over the world, yet their genesis is often a complete mystery. One explanation for these impressions in nature, found in such abundance at Markawasi, is the interplay between the human mind and nature itself. This phenomenon is known as simulacrum. According to Cambridge scholar John Michel, we are programmed at birth to recognize the human face. In fact, a child's first drawing is often a human face, And as we continue through life, we see our own image and animal images reflected in the world around us. He claims this is a natural function of human consciousness. Furthermore, he believes there is a corresponding tendency in nature to manifest repeatedly certain basic designs, including human and animal forms. In other words, people are hardwired to see human and animal images in nature, and nature is predisposed to repeat certain basic forms and designs, of which we are one. Taking it one step further, Michel has found many examples of simulacra where the image seems to embody the spirit of the surrounding landscape. The Romans referred to this as the genius loci, or spirit of the place. This image from Armenia is said to represent the martyr, Saint Vartan, who was killed in battle near this location. The delicate features of this Welsh maiden were found in the mountains of North Wales, near the quaint town of Bedgallard. Could the monument of humanity be the genius loci of Markawasi? Could the entire Markawasi Plateau be the genius loci of the human race? Some believe that the statues on Markawasi were made by the hand of man.
Inside this head we have a big, large, beady eye.
Others feel that they are the product of nature itself, interpreted by the human mind. Another possibility is suggested by Javier Russo, the grandson of Daniel Russo. He explains how nature may have provided the basic form, and that man later modified it.
The artist that made Markawasi wanted to finish the work that nature began. Finishing the work of nature does not mean to redo it, nor does it mean to sculpt all the stones. They only needed to give some fundamental touches, like with the monument to humanity. It is so big that you only have to touch it a bit to represent what it is. It would be wrong to say that all of the stones have been sculpted. There are many that are simply natural. But that is what is so special about Markawasi. It's a mountain that is full of natural figures, that has special shapes, that is sacred. It's truly magic.
Javier Russo is an artist living in Lima, Peru. He carries on the traditions of his grandfather by incorporating themes of mythology and symbolism in his art.
When I was 16, I went to Markawasi for the first time with my grandfather. He taught me to recognize mythology in the symbols there. So, working with my grandfather, I learned to see the universal symbols which represent the inner man, such as solar symbols, which I use in my art today. I am looking not for what is current, but what is eternal for the human being. Symbolism is everlasting, and Markawasi is a great book of symbols. When you walk there at night, you feel you are surrounded by a mystery, shapes that can take you to your unconscious mind, or can take you to the legends, or it can take you to the scenes of a millennial theater.
One of Daniel Russo's greatest contributions to the study of Markawasi was to map the precise viewing spots and record the exact time and date when the statues are most clearly seen. As a result, he coined the term point of view statues.
The explanation is very difficult because it depends on the light and the point of view. If the point of view changes, everything changes. The twilight shadows or the moonlight revealed carved on the stones countless interwoven figures that are invisible in daylight. Our mind tries to find a logical argument to explain this, but there is an air of suspense that leaves our mind naked and transports our souls to the past.
The notion of point of view is well illustrated by this figure Russo called the fallen horse and rider.
The locals call this figure El Caballo Caída, the fallen horse. And if you look carefully, you see what looks like a horse lying down on the ground.
Okay.
You have its feet at the back, you have its long body in like a U shape, and then its head
towards us.
Okay, so it's sort of facing us, or to the left.
Yes, that's right. So we have the horse in a horse position, as if it was lying down on the ground.
Okay.
We have a horse's head with a large eye, about halfway up on the right-hand side, and its nostrils at the front. And it's like, looks exhausted, looks absolutely exhausted.
Right.
Now, let's go back a bit, and we can find behind the horse a rider. Do you mind if we move back for a second,
Okay.
Dr. Chuk?
Okay.
And you'll
Where
see,
am I going?
About here's good, here's quite good. Well, Dr. Russo reckons, and I think so as well, that the figure behind the horse on the other side there is the rider. So if we look from exactly this point of view, you see the rider riding on the horse.
Oh, I see, because there's this line splitting the figure in half, and right beyond that line there's that structure that's the rider. Now, if this is a horse that we're seeing in this structure, I mean, that's very interesting, because horses did not come until the Spaniards.
That's
I mean,
right.
the native Incans and pre-Incans, before the Spaniards came, they didn't know about horses.
They had no idea. In fact, they were frightened by the horses when they first came here.
Right.
And the horses didn't arrive here till the 16th century. Where do the horses originally
Well, yeah,
come
they
from?
came from the Arabs and from Europe, of course, and then the Spaniards brought them over here.
Correct, because here in Markawasi, one of the strange things is that you always have to be in the right spot, which means not only standing in the right spot, the right time of day, even the right time of year. Because if we came here, for example, in December or January, we wouldn't see anything at all.
Wouldn't see anything at all.
Nothing at all.
Oh, that's interesting. That's
right.
interesting. Now, this is, as I understand it, this is a theory that was developed by Daniel Russo, Dr. Russo, when
Dr.
he
Daniel
worked
Russo discovered Markawasi in 1952. He spent 8 years examining the statues, and this is one of his favorites here. This is one
Oh,
of his
really?
absolute favorites. Yeah.
Wow, that's very neat.
So we're following in the master's footsteps.
Now, if we keep walking,
Right.
okay, so now if we keep walking, because I want to observe this, we keep walking, now it goes out of view again.
Well, the horse is still there.
The horse is still there, but the rider
now is,
is sort of offset and disappearing.
From this simple ledge, the condors are seen. In addition to the many spots which afford an ideal point of view when standing, some of the more prominent statues are best seen from so-called viewing seats, a comfortable depression or a bench in the landscape that Russo claimed was directly aligned with the figure you're intended to see.
Yeah, it looks like what I'm sitting on, it looks like a chair. It sure enough looks like a seat or a chair to sit here and view this structure. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. This is totally covered with the organic lichens and other forms. Very, very ancient surfaces. So this has been clearly like this for a long, long time. And, you know, did they maybe cut that out in millennium gone past so that we can sit down like this? Or did it just fall out like that naturally? But when I'm sitting there, I have this beautiful vantage point of what, I mean, you can view as a camel, and then the valley beyond and the mountains beyond that.
One of Peter's cameramen, while looking for a good vantage point to film a figure on the edge of a cliff, found the ideal spot and noticed a smoothed-out seat directly behind his tripod. Making use of this comfortable vantage point, he filmed a sequence of this intriguing rock formation known as the Pharaoh. For Russo, point of view meant not only the place where you stand, but also the time of day and even the time of year when you see it. He noticed that most of the figures are best seen at the end of June, around the summer solstice. To test his hypothesis, the film crew chose a figure known as the Mexican lion and did a 5-hour time-lapse sequence from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. At noon, when the sun is directly overhead, the lion's features were indistinct. But as the sun crept west and began to set, the shadows deepened, creating what some felt was the face of a lion.
Nobody can go to Markawasi and be the same when you come down. Somehow the stones affect you. They get into your mind, they get into your brain, they come into your dreams. And when you come back, you're a different person.
As Daniel Russo said, the faces change or come alive at different times of the year as the light hits them in different angles. And I know it might sound a bit corny, but for me it's become a real metaphor for life. It's, you know, if you see something from one perspective, or as Daniel Russo said, point of view, and then you see it from another point of view, things change. And so, you know, the enigma of Markawasi for me is that simple. It's that from one point of view something looks very clear, and from another point of view at a different time of the year it can look different.
The ancients had knowledge that was passed from hand to hand like a jewel that had to be transmitted to the future, because they knew that there would be a flood that would obliterate this information. So Markawasi is another sacred mountain, like the pyramids. It is a pyramid made of a mountain, and they both store information about the past times that we are just beginning to understand.
As a geologist, I have to say, over the years, I have come to even I really hate the distinction in some cases between natural and artificial, human and otherwise, because we are part of nature. So yeah, if you want to put them into the little pigeonhole categories of natural versus artificial, yes, they're natural. But does that detract from them? I don't think so. I don't really even think that's a question now. Yes, I came up here saying, oh, I got to figure out, are they artificial? Are they natural? It has to be one or the other. We need to know. I'm now going away thinking that's not even an important issue. That's not even an important question. What's really important is how do they affect us? How are we transformed effectively by coming up here and spending time in their presence?
Daniel Russo passed away, and his friends and relatives returned him once more to the plateau that he loved. In a ceremony timeless in its simplicity, his ashes were flung into the air so that his spirit would unite for all time with the wondrous forms of Markawasi. The mystery of Markawasi continues, but the meaning of Markawasi is perhaps best expressed in Daniel Russo's words.
They wanted to express themselves as a group. They wanted to perpetuate their common desires. They wanted to make us aware of their existence, to remind us of their unity in a human ideal. Markawasi, 12,000 feet above the sea. Markawasi, which towers above the Pacific, and which awakes in the souls of her visitors the most profound of human emotions.